So hi, everyone. You're coming into the room. Please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, if you want, your city and country, and any urgent message you have for us at the very beginning of this meeting. We'll use the chat to record your thoughts and who is in the room. So Zarin, I see you. Introduce yourself.
Hi, do you want me to do it in the chat or?
Chat, please. Yeah, exciting to see everyone. We have Dan from New York, from Baha'i International Community. Hey, great. Arelis Bellarini, Maria Salcedos, Club de Madrid, Dina Khaled from Global Network of Women Peace Builders, Jeff Huffines from C4UN, Zarin Hainsworth, Widow Rights International, Zarin Hamid, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We have a participant from Chile, Tiago, welcome. Sarah Franklin from SDG Watch Europe. Glad to have Europeans here with us today. Pradeep from India. Gender, Peace and Security, UK, thanks for coming. We had over 100 participants registered. And if by chance, you know, people who couldn't attend actually because of time differences or other obligations, I'm sure that we will be sharing this recording, and everything in the chat will also be registered and recorded and part of our summary report at the end. So, hey, Ireland, thanks for joining us, Deidre. Manju from the All India Women's Conference.
Yes. Good evening.
Hello, yes. Please use the chat for introducing yourself. Khaled from Egypt. Wonderful. Well, we are going to let everyone continue to introduce themselves, and I will actually like to, at this point, just do some screen sharing here so that we can all see what's going to be happening today. So, I am Soon Young Yoon with the International Alliance of Women, and coincidentally, my name in Korean means peace, peace forever, one of the themes of what we're going to discuss today. I am your moderator, and today we are going to talk about our common agenda. Not everyone here probably has read this yet, so that's wonderful. We are welcoming new people into this process. This is the second in a series of expert dialogues convened by C4UN, the Coalition for the UN, on the Secretary General's report. So the report recognizes that humanity's future depends on our ability to work together and to tackle simultaneously intertwined crises, which we all recognize to be inequality, including gender inequality, racial inequality, violence and conflict, and of course, the climate emergency. I really like the report's call for a renewed social contract anchored in human rights, with a focus on solidarity with future generations and youth. So the report really tries to launch a process of which we are a part so that we can make a breakthrough as a global family, and we can ensure an accelerated response by everyone, all stakeholders, especially the UN, on accomplishing the Sustainable Development Goals. So the purpose of our meeting today is to engage with our presenters, but also you, and to get your contributions as experts in your own communities to an event that will be convened by the President of the General Assembly next week, February 21st and 22nd, on exactly the same theme of peace, international law, and digital cooperation. So, sorry. Let me introduce our presenters. Augusto Lopez Claros is the Executive Director of the Global Governance Forum. He's an international economist, most recently at the World Bank. He has been associated with the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, with the World Economic Forum, the IMF, and he holds a PhD in economics from Duke University. So cross-Atlantic citizen for us. Agustina Del Campo is the director at the Center for Studies on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information at the Universidad de Palermo. She's a guest expert with the Colombia Global Freedom of Expression Project. She teaches courses on the internet and human rights. Ms. Del Campo also serves as vice chair to the Global Network Initiative and is a member of the board of Access Now. Marina Kumslova is the UN Policy and Advocacy Advisor for the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, or what we call sometimes GPAC. She's been working in the field of human rights since 2013, focusing on enforced disappearances in Chechnya. She joined the Women, Peace and Security Program at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, related to the Middle East and North Africa. So our format, our three presenters will give 10-minute kickoff thoughts, and then we'll turn it over to you, the experts in your own NGOs and fields of knowledge. And just remember that while the presenters are speaking, you can also write in the chat your own reactions, because as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be recording and paying a lot of attention to those conversations. If you have questions or thoughts, also you can raise your hands at the end of the presentations. So wonderful, we have a lot more people who have joined us here. And so I will give the floor to our first presenter. Oh, sorry, Monique, we need a poll to see what's going on with our common agenda. And yes, here we are. This is exciting because we're going to find out what your priority is. On your computer or other mobile device, can you vote for one of these choices? We'd like to know what is your priority in the Secretary General's report on our common agenda. We have three themes: peace and security, international law, and digital cooperation. And maybe you're interested in all of them. Can you vote for one of these? I'll give you a moment to see the poll, and then we'll actually be able to see the results. I've just submitted mine. And Monique, are you the one who's going to, Monique is our tech helper. Monique, are you going to be able to give us the results, or am I seeing the results?
I will be able to give them to you. I was just waiting for people to stop submitting.
Okay, please vote for one of the three. Peace, and we have to say security, peace and security, digital cooperation, international law. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so I can see the results. We have 41% of you in the room are interested specifically in peace and security. Doesn't mean that you're not interested in the others. 7% are very committed to the issue of international law. A good 10% on digital cooperation. And this is the best. 41% of you really want to pay attention to all three. So that's great. Augusto, I will help you keep time by giving you a signal when you have 2 minutes left and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As you all well know, corruption has emerged as one of the more intractable problems that is facing the international community today. We economists at the World Bank and academia have been studying the issue for many, many years and have examined sort of a whole range of dimensions about the deleterious effects of corruption. For more than a decade already, we have known from estimates done at the IMF that the annual cost of bribery is somewhere between $1.5 and $2 trillion, which is about 2% of global GDP. You know, this is a huge sum when you consider all the unmet needs of society today. Not only does corruption undermine economic growth, corruption undermines the revenue potential, the ability of governments to collect revenue, and therefore it imposes constraints on their ability to spend. It leads to informality, it exacerbates income inequality, which, as you know, is a very serious problem today. And it also has shown to have strong linkages to systematic human rights abuses. Its presence in the world at large has become a source of political instability as well. And like climate change, I firmly believe that corruption poses an existential threat to our political and to our social order as well. In 2018, Judge Wolf in Massachusetts wrote a compelling article called "The World Needs an International Anti-Corruption Court," in which he noted that corruption flourishes because of a failure to enforce existing criminal statutes prohibiting bribery, money laundering, and the misappropriation of natural resources. He said that, he put it this way, he said, impunity exists because corrupt leaders control the police, the prosecutors, and the courts. The organization that he and Judge Richard Goldstone from South Africa funded Integrity Initiatives International, is now spearheading the effort to establish this court. And we at the Global Governance Forum are honored and delighted to be strong supporters of this effort. What I like to do in the time that I have remaining is to basically ask, what are some of the arguments that one can put forward to persuade states and other stakeholders to support the creation of an international anti-corruption court? The first one that comes to mind is that we think that it's good politics. There is growing concern within civil society, the business community, and other stakeholder groups about the extent of corruption, and growing evidence that it is actually a problem that is getting worse. The World Bank has developed a number of indicators that actually allow to measure metrics of corruption. They have been doing it already for nearly 20 years, and the numbers actually show a deterioration of the state of corruption in the world. And it is, as I said before, beginning to affect political stability and the functioning of vital institutions across the world. Governments that are at least trying to operate within an environment based on the rule of law, which is another of the themes of our common agenda, reasonable levels of openness and transparency, governments that are trying to legitimize themselves periodically through the ballot box, may find it politically beneficial to be identified with an initiative aimed at creating greater accountability and justice in the world. So that would be my first argument. Secondly, this organization, this court, could create a level playing field for the business community. I want to tell you, I visited some senior officials at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Spain to talk about this court a couple of months ago. And there was broad support there for this initiative. Basically, their argument was very practical. He said that Spanish multilateral corporations who do business in Latin America, in the Arab world, in sub-Saharan Africa, find themselves at a competitive disadvantage because of their inability to pay bribes. These companies might welcome the establishment of an institution that would help to establish a level playing field by creating incentives for accountability and reducing the incentives for corruption. You know, I am an economist, as Ms. Yoon introduced me, and we economists think that creating a level playing field for the private sector could reap important economic dividends. We have known, for instance, that in environments that are characterized by greater transparency, openness. There are higher levels of foreign direct investment with all the benefits that this brings, including know-how, technology, and so on. Corruption undermines foreign investment because it acts exactly as a tax. Other things being equal, investors will always prefer to be operating in countries that are less corrupt rather than more corrupt. Third point, this court would allow for the recovery of stolen assets, which are laundered, stolen, and which could be returned to the people under appropriate safeguards. And here there is already an initiative underway between the World Bank and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. It's called STAR, Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative. This initiative already for more than a decade has been supporting international efforts to end safe havens for stolen assets and facilitate systemic and timely asset recovery. And it has provided actually knowledge and practical guidance to thousands of practitioners in nearly 70 countries. And this is a good starting point, and more can be done in this area, of course, because we want to impose a degree of accountability on those kleptocrats who are stealing money left and right and causing so much damage to their societies. A fourth very important point, and again, I come here with my macro perspective as an international economist. We know that the fiscal outlook in the next several years is going to be quite dire, not just in the developing worlds, but in the high-income countries as well. The fiscal response to COVID has been massive spending, appropriately so, but the counterpart to this has been a huge increase in public indebtedness. Furthermore, budgets will also be under pressure because of population aging, and they need to finance the transition to a renewable economy, a renewable energy economy, which is going to require trillions of resources. Therefore, this would argue that we need to plug the leakages to public resources, which come as a result of bribery, corruption, and plain stealing. One last point, and I think I'm well within my time limit, is that I'd like to say that corruption creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is bad for prosperity. It is bad for economic growth. It's bad for the ability of governments to generate revenue that they can deploy to socially vital areas. There are no enforceable rights that emanate from a transaction involving bribery. The firm that obtains a concession from a highly placed bureaucrat as a result of bribery cannot know with certainty how long the benefit will last. The terms of the contract or arrangement may have to be constantly renegotiated to extend the life of the benefit or to prevent the collapse. There's a very famous, highly respected expert on corruption at Yale University, Professor Rose Ackerman, and she has given countless examples. In Malaysia, for example, companies that secured illegal logging rights had incentives to cut as many trees as possible, as fast as possible, because they could never be sure that those incentives would not be taken away by somebody who was willing to pay a higher bribe, right? And in an uncertain environment with insecure property rights, the firm will be less willing to invest and plan for the future. And so this leads to a kind of a short-term focus to maximize short-term profits, which is sort of emerges as the optimal strategy, even though in the process we may be leading to deforestation and the rapid exhaustion of non-renewable resources. This uncertainty is partly responsible for the perversion in the sorts of incentives that prompt individuals to want to seek political office. Where corruption is rife, politicians will want to remain in office as long as possible, not because they are necessarily working for the public good, but simply because they want to keep latching themselves on to the sources of benefits that come as a result of corruption. Hence, you see the prevalence of presidents for life increasingly in many parts of the world. And where long stays in office are no longer a possibility because the country has gradually shifted to more democratic forms of governments, then the incentive is to steal as much as possible, as quickly as possible, given the relatively sort of short window of opportunity. And International Anti-Corruption Court would help change this toxic environment, which is created by the prevalence of kleptocracy and grand corruption. Finally, this initiative, it seems to me, fits very well with the Secretary General's call in our common agenda to accelerate action to tackle corruption in line with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Thank you very much. I think I'm well within my 10 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Augusto. Many great thoughts in a short period of time. We do have a chance now to have some of you participants join the discussion. Monique is going to let me know who would like to speak. I think we did hear from Maja Groff. Is she in the room, Monique?
No.
Marja Groff is not in the room. If you wish to speak, I think Monique can see your hands and develop a list. Meanwhile, Augusto, I wonder if you would mind returning to some of the ideas that you presented. Can you explain much more about STAR? And would that also, you think, be able to cover the digital world that's opening up another arena for possible crime and even violence? Yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to say a little more about STAR. You know,
Yeah.
This is an initiative that was started maybe 20 years ago. I don't remember exactly the year that it was launched, but it was a collaboration between the World Bank and the United Nations. The United Nations has an Office of Crime and Drugs. And the idea essentially was to go after assets that were known to have been taken away from the country, monies that deposited in Switzerland or in other financial centers. And essentially, the initiative behind this program is that you begin a legal case, you get the banks to collaborate, and eventually you repatriate the resources that have been stolen back to the country under certain safeguards. The idea is essentially not to return the monies directly to the budget where they may be stolen again, but rather to return the monies to support social programs, unemployment compensation, children's benefits, investment in public health, buying COVID vaccines, and so on. You know, something that we don't realize is that corruption actually kills. There is a direct correlation between mortality and corruption. Monies that are stolen means monies that we don't have for COVID vaccinations, means monies that we don't have to improve our public health infrastructures, monies that we don't have to train our children in the new technologies, which are absolutely essential if you're going to find useful employment in a gradually more complex global economy.
Thank you very much. I see a question here. There's a challenge in a way by Roberto Bicio. He's asking, isn't the diplomatic immunity of the World Bank and the IMF in the South also a factor that promotes corruption? Diplomatic immunity, do you think that that is an issue here?
The issue here is not the corruption of World Bank officials, although there have been cases of misbehavior which have been followed up. The issue here is corruption within largely, the public sector in countries. The World Bank has very strict safeguards to protect the use of its resources. When it disburses funds, to build a school or a highway, it does this under very strict safeguards to prevent, these monies from leaking out. But it doesn't prevent, for instance, foreign aid from leaking out, to other places. There are countries, I won't mention names, although I could, there are countries where certain taxes get directly deposited to the personal account of the head of state, right? Just think how shocking that is.
Thank you, thank you. We have a question here from Zarin Hainsworth on the link to peace and security. So is there research, she's asking, is there research on the relationship between conflict and corruption, for example, blood diamonds?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Zarin. It's an excellent question. Yeah. There have been a number of studies which show that corruption, beyond the bribery, right? The illicit transaction where money changes hands under a table because a government official provides some benefit to, let's say, a business entrepreneur. Beyond that, environments that are rife with corruption, especially kleptocracies, which means that the head of state or the senior politicians control the courts, they control the judges, they control the prosecutors. Those environments are much more ripe for corruption. Other forms of violence, emerge. The country eventually becomes ungovernable. We have many examples of that. It can lead to ethnic tensions and problems, because in a country in Africa that is currently ruled, let's say, by a particular ethnic group, where the benefits of corruption are directed to them, the other groups will be constantly disappointed and wanting to get back to power so that they can enjoy those benefits and so on. So it creates a very, very toxic environment, which then spills over internationally. It leads to money laundering. It leads to the drug trade, and all that, of course, as you know, has security implications as well. The number of people who have died in all kinds of murders and violence in Mexico and Colombia and Bolivia and other places over the last many decades is into the hundreds of thousands, right? So it is a serious problem.
Yeah. And we also know that international crime is also linked to trafficking of labor, of children, women. And so that leads us to our next speaker, actually, on international law. I'd like to give the floor to Augustina. Please unmute yourself and join us.
I couldn't find the unmute myself thing. So thank you so much for the invitation. I commend all of you on this important initiative to support the UN and help it reach the best possible leadership in facing very thorny challenges and helping the international community embrace the opportunities that we see today, particularly the digitally related ones. So I'm going to speak about 3 points. The first one will be connectivity and the digital divide. The second will be digital rights and human rights. And the third will be digital cooperation and the global compact. Going to my first point on connectivity and the digital divide, research from the Danish Institute suggests that over 90% of the Sustainable Development Goals targets are connected to human rights and labor. The relevance of the internet for the exercise and enjoyment of human rights is today, with the pandemic, probably more obvious to everyone than ever before. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen all of our lives basically digitalized, including economic, social, and cultural rights, like health, education, work. But also our political rights, speech, association, protest, political rights, just to give a few examples. So the pandemic basically contributed to highlight and popularize an old mantra from the digital rights community and organizations that digital rights are human rights. Secure and open access to the internet is essential to human rights and the accomplishment of the SDGs. Bridging the digital divides, and I'm putting an S on divides, is more important today than maybe ever before. And among the challenges in bridging those existing gaps, there are different challenges to target. Infrastructure is one of them, but there are also other challenges that need to be urgently addressed. Large parts of the world's population remain offline. Other parts of the population remain censored and surveilled access. And there are still internet shutdowns in a lot of places in the world. Access Now has documented more than 50 internet shutdowns only in the first quarter of 2021. Initiatives like the Keep It On campaign that Access Now is promoting are key to put this into light, the progress and the pitfalls in guaranteeing connectivity for all in 2030. To my second point, digital rights and human rights. The pandemic raised awareness as to the relevance of the internet and the exercise and enjoyment of human rights, and also as to the threats that technology could entail for human rights. They're raising concerns over human rights violations online, and this has led in many parts of the world to new efforts to regulate the internet. In these efforts, it is not uncommon to see new calls for human rights standards for the digital world. Let me once again go to the old mantra that was popularized during the pandemic: digital rights are human rights. If we ground ourselves in that mantra, we immediately notice that there are standards, processes, institutions that pre-exist the internet and that offer a lot of times adequate guidelines and frameworks to protect human rights online. Digital rights are not unregulated or undefined or unknown, and the UN has different offices and institutions that have already developed tools to tackle the existing challenges. They have developed standards, they have developed guidelines that fully apply online and that create specific obligations for states to guarantee those rights online. So one first conclusion from this is, I don't think we need new standards, new human rights standards, but rather we need better implementation and application of the existing ones, which is a pervasive problem within our sphere. Moreover, what we have seen in different regions of the world are important setbacks in the regulation and protection of rights like freedom of expression or rights to protest or association under the guise of better internet regulation. The sole focus on online harms in many cases attempts against the proper framework that human rights law has historically proposed, which are based on legality, necessity, and proportionality. It is important that in framing a renewed social contract for human rights, that we don't relitigate the contents and the scope of those rights that were so hard for many to achieve and that are still being fought for by so many others. A final point on this, as a Latin American, because I cannot help myself. I was particularly concerned with the inclusion of the right to be forgotten in the list that was shared with me among the key concerns when speaking about human rights and the digital realm. As probably the Latin Americans in the room know, the right to be forgotten is not a recognized right in the Latin American region. We have data protection, of course, but most of the countries in the region do not recognize the right to be forgotten, at least not in the way the European Union does. And for us in the Latin American debate, at least, we still have a number of very serious concerns on how the right to be forgotten would play with other rights, particularly freedom of expression and access to information. Final point, digital cooperation and the Global Compact. Digital cooperation is key to bridging the digital divide and guaranteeing human rights online. The initiatives set forth by the Secretary General, including the roadmap for digital cooperation, have become a reference point internationally. There are, however, at least two important challenges and improvements that should be tackled. One is transparency at the UN level. What is happening? How is it happening? When is it happening? And a second one, very much related to that, is multi-stakeholder engagement. There should be a way to guarantee multi-stakeholder engagement in this process, particularly civil society. And when I speak about civil society, I don't only mean those registered with the UN, but a wider pool of civil society, including those who may not be as close to the UN processes as many of you probably are. With those comments, I conclude my presentation, and of course, I'll be happy to discuss.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Deirdre de Burco wishes to take the floor. Deirdre, we can open your mic and you can ask a question, make a short comment of 2 minutes, please.
Great, thanks very much. So thanks, Augustine, the speaker. For us, the Global Civil Society Network I work for is very interested in this issue of creating a more enabling digital environment for civil society. And I might just make a couple of points just to say, totally agree with all of the various points you made about human rights and digital space and so on. But I suppose we believe that an enabling environment for civil society, online and offline, are necessary preconditions to allow civil society to flourish and to be effective in the public good work that it does. So we would really argue that in key spaces such as the UN debates now on our common future, you know, where the issue of international digital cooperation is being discussed, civil society really needs to make sure that these discussions don't focus exclusively, because so far, particularly at the EU level, we've noticed there's a big focus on how to provide business and SMEs with greater digital access and digital connectivity. But there also needs to be a focus on how to promote digital access and digital capacity development for civil society everywhere, and particularly in the global south. A lot of our members in the global south and, you know, lack this digital access. So as you mentioned, half the world's population isn't digitally connected yet, and you know, the civil society must, you know, call on governments and the international community to act quickly to make sure that the digital inclusion of all is achieved, and particularly of low income and socially excluded demographic groups, by providing fast, affordable and equitable access to digital infrastructure and data for all. But when we look at civil society, organized civil society is made up of more than 10 million organizations worldwide, and a survey that was carried out by our partner TechSoup, it's a Tech for Good NGO, found that more than 82% of global CSOs saw their services disrupted by the forced digital changes in the pandemic, and that very few of them had help navigating these challenges, and that 66% of them were reliant on occasional volunteers, and 10% had no access to IT support of any kind, and fewer than 25% of them had a digital strategy to guide them. So again, with all the changes, the move to the cloud, it's very likely that for a lot of CSOs, their use of on-premises solutions for digital access won't be the norm in a couple of years' time. And yet, you know, 90% of 1.4 million civil society organizations that have registered with TechSoup still use on-premises software for at least some of their daily operations. So the pandemic really was a wake-up call, because in terms of technology moving to the cloud, it will mean that more than 90% of CSOs will cease to exist within a decade if they can't operate digitally and make this shift to the cloud. And many of them can't because of a lack of technical skills or connectivity, and they will experience technological degradation and eventual collapse as the software they rely on becomes unsupported and beginning to fall, or to fail. So just to say, a really important point today, I think, is that when the UN, or the process of UN reform is looking at this whole area of international digital cooperation, civil society needs to be at the table, making a very strong point. It's not just business that needs to be connected digitally, it's also civil society, and that without that, the kind of civic space, the rights you were talking about, can't be realized. So we really need to make sure we are at this table and part of this discussion, and that we make sure that the needs of civil society as a constituency are included when governments and the UN itself are preparing their digital strategies. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you, Deirdre. In fact, on that line, Francesca Serrano did ask the question here, is it possible to digitize the communities of Indigenous peoples? What progress do we see there? So, Augustina, do you have some comments to make on these two queries?
No, I want to thank Deirdre for her very important point. When I mentioned digital divides, I meant a lot of very different gaps that we have. We have gender gaps, we have industry gaps, we have geographic gaps, we have economic and income-based gaps, and they all need to be addressed. And when speaking about meaningful access, we not only mean a connection, which is the fundamental, very, very basic part of being connected, but also the ability to connect, the ability to produce and to use the internet in a valuable and in a way that allows us to exercise and fully enjoy human rights online. So I fully agree with you, Deirdre, that that's absolutely important. As to indigenous communities and access. There are a number of different initiatives that are being developed in different regions. There are community networks that are being developed and different projects that are working on this, but there's definitely a need for concrete policies that target the most vulnerable, the unconnected, and that design those policies thinking of the communities that they're going to be targeting and considering their own needs and their own how to better access, how to better provide for those specific communities.
Thank you. Thank you. I see a hand up from Paulus Rama. Paulus, where are you from? Where are you speaking from?
Thank you, Yun. I am speaking from New York. I am Indonesian. I work with the Vivat International. Yeah, my question actually goes to Mr. Augusto. And I asked about business on human trafficking and corruption, as you mentioned before. So you know that it's about $150 billion as a profit annually from the business of human trafficking. And the victims of this human trafficking is about, according to ILO reports, is about 40 million people become victims of human trafficking from this business of human trafficking, especially the forced labor and forced marriage. My question is, how do you see this business on human trafficking in the context of corruption at the global level? And the second question is, what is the prospect of this to address this issue on business human trafficking in the common agenda in the years to come? Thank you.
Thank you. Paulus, I think your question is, we were a bit late to get to you, maybe, was directed at August. August, you are welcome to answer at this point. Let's all join in this discussion.
Yes, very briefly. And I will also take advantage to answer another question which was posed by everybody concerning the amount of wealth that has leaked out of countries, and it is sitting on offshore financial centers, throughout the world. In fact, let me answer this last question first. There's a question posed by Zakir. We know that money has been basically deposited in offshore financial centers for the last 100 years, perhaps longer. And so one interesting empirical question is, what is the stock of this money sitting in these accounts in Switzerland and other places? And the best estimate that I have seen is from an economist from the University of Berkeley by the name of Gabriel Zuckman, who estimates that something like $8 trillion, which is about 10% of world GNP, is sitting on these accounts. This is money that is presumed to have been, taken away, untaxed or as a result of corrupt transactions. Paulus, in terms of this is a huge amount, of course. It's a huge amount when you consider all the needs that we have in the world today that I have already mentioned, and that have become especially visible during the last couple of years as a result of COVID. Paulus, in regards to your question about human trafficking, that is obviously an aspect of a dimension of corruption. It involves illegal activity, it involves human rights violations. It has a whole range of dimensions. It is not something that the International Anti-Corruption Court would be dealing with directly, because there are other UN bodies and other legal instruments that would allow us to work with those problems. The International Anti-Corruption Court is very much focused on what we call ground corruption, which is a specific term. It has a specific meaning. It is essentially the use by public officials of their power and their influence for private gain, to enrich themselves. That would be the focus of the court. And it would be initially focused on kleptocrats, those countries where, because they control the courts and the prosecutors and the judges, they have complete impunity. Again, I don't want to embarrass anybody. There are countries where this is happening as we speak. My point rather is to say that in those countries, where the legal system has failed, has imploded because it is completely captured by the kleptocrats, you need a separate mechanism. You need an institution that would actually address those cases. Human trafficking is a tragedy, but needs to be dealt with outside of this framework.
Thank you, August. And Augustina, actually, this kind of brings us back to something that a lot of NGOs are concerned with, which is opening up digital rights, making them a human right, improving access and inclusivity. But what about the use of the digital platform for actually recruiting traffic, actually organizing trafficking, for example? We know that that is happening, organizing terrorism. And so what, Augustina, would you recommend for the UN to protect us in the uses of digital platforms? What kind of regulations and digital cooperation do we need there?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a hard question. If I knew the answer, I would be shouting it from the top of every roof. Let me rephrase that. Let me tell you what I don't think the UN should be doing to protect us from that. I think the UN should not promote a debilitated view of freedom of expression, right to association, and privacy in their efforts to protect us from online harms. I think our democratic societies need now more than ever robust human rights protections, and those include freedom of expression, access to information, privacy, our rights to association, our rights to protest. So in our efforts to fight and combat terrorism, human trafficking, and any other crime that we might think of that can be committed in the internet, and of course they can be committed in the internet, but they were also committed before the internet. We should not generate policies or promote policies that undermine human rights directly. And that is not as easy as it sounds. As we look at the policies that are being discussed in different countries when trying to tackle issues like disinformation, radicalization, hate speech, a lot of times we see policies and regulation that directly promote a direct infringement on basic human rights like privacy and freedom of expression.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your answer to that. Dina, Dina, tell us your last name and tell us 2-minute thoughts on the topic at hand.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you so much for convening us today. My name is Dina Khaled. I'm a program officer at the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. I also wanted to briefly touch on the link between digitalization, human rights, and women, peace, and security. I really appreciated Augustina's presentation around digital cooperation and how digital rights are human rights, and how there are already frameworks and tools that can help us guarantee these digital rights. And here I would say that the WPS agenda, the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, as a multi-stakeholder framework, provides crucial guidance here. So I'll try to keep this to under 2 minutes, but last year we conducted
Dina, I'm going to ask you to hold that because we can come back to you when we look for more solutions.
Definitely.
Can we do that? Okay,
Absolutely.
great. Yeah, wonderful. Yes. Okay, because I know you're heading in that direction. At this point, let's turn to our third presenter. Marina, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. It's a great pleasure to be part of this discussion with all of you today. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, also known as GPAC, which is the global network of local peace builders from different parts of the world. And from our perspective, and I may be bringing quite a critical voice around the issue of a common agenda, but the value of common agenda and the new agenda for peace is yet to be defined for us, at least as a network. It is frankly unclear why we need yet another agenda for peace, where all possible commitments to peace, peace continuum, prevention, disarmament, peaceful, just and inclusive society, human security, and so on and so forth, have already been created. And we have discussed it today in this conversation already, in terms of the only thing that we have failed on, well, not we necessarily, but the international community really has failed on, is to implement those agendas. So what is the value of spending all of this money, having like forcing as a UN headquarters, the entire world to kind of think about the agenda, put resources into it, if really that may as well be something that we will never implement again. At GPAC, we have just finished research in 3 countries on the implementation of peace building and sustaining peace agenda, which is from 2016. What we have learned, besides the fact that it has failed to be implemented, is that people at the community level do not know about this agenda at all. It has certainly failed to deliver on the promise of sustaining peace, because this agenda is being driven from the top. It is very highly UN agenda that UN people have to implement. And there is, of course, reference to women and youth, but not necessarily more than that. It has no localization component. It has no traction among local communities, and really not certainly going anywhere. The question that should be on the table, I think, is what does the new agenda for peace, or the common agenda itself, what kind of value they can add for the international community and for the promise of peace. The only 2 agendas from our perspective that have made a real difference and became a real tool at the country level to drive the agenda on peace forward is women, peace and security, and youth, peace and security agenda. And the reason why those agendas have been so important and useful is because they actually provided tools to people to shift the narratives and shift the power towards someone who has normally always been within the dichotomy of being a voiceless victim. The rest of the agendas are all top-down exercises where saviors of this world have decided to throw on other people to help them live their life because they know better. So the key point of my presentation today will be the fact that if we are to commit to a new agenda for peace, the only way it will be valuable is if it will shift the narrative and power towards people who are otherwise voiceless and instead of whom decisions are currently being made. This agenda have to give them tools, have to give them resources, and have to make member states specifically have to make specific commitment that would enable local actors to be operational leaders in building peace. What does it mean? It's really 3 quick points on our side. Well, we can of course talk about it forever. First, local communities need to be empowered to build infrastructures for peace that are globally supported. For example, early warning and early response mechanisms across Africa, Southern Africa, West Africa, Central Africa. Those are unique avenues for community actors to be meaningful partner, to flag the signs of instability to the decision maker, and to be actually able to prevent conflict. At the same time, we don't really do well on listening. Even if people are collecting data on the ground, we are not really doing good in listening to what they're saying. The regional actors, the national actors, none of them are necessarily take this information meaningfully into consideration. So maybe one thing that the new agenda for peace can actually give us is an opportunity to have people on the other side, at the early response side, who will actually be taking the data and the information that's been so carefully and methodologically collected at the country level to be part of the actual decision-making process. As the common agenda is the agenda for member states, they really need to commit to making such infrastructures for peace supported through adequate early response systems. And not only in Africa, it has to be present everywhere in the world, and the people need to be able to kind of get to that point. The second point is investment, right? There is this point under the Agenda for Peace about financing. But investing in conflict prevention and peace building should first and foremost means that resources actually get to the local level. That requires devising mechanisms that ensure, first, the chain of intermediaries is shortened. Second, that core, direct, and flexible funding is available to local peace builders. Third, the relationship between the donors and recipients are not the relationship of power, but the relationship of trust and co-creation. Fourth, that local civil society early warning and early response systems are adequately supported and integrated into relevant peace insecurity mechanisms. At every step of the way, its member states, again, who are also the donors, should consult with civil society, not at the time of grant disbursement, but in the process of developing their grants, to be able to understand the hurdles faced by civil society and develop grants that actually do work for them. And really, if we think about how the money are being allocated, we have recently received a grant in Fiji of $25,000 to help to 7 small island states in the Pacific to recover from COVID. And at the same time, we can see on and on and on again how UN basically gets funding in millions to be disbursed at the country level, where people, again, at the time that it gets to civil society as implementers, it becomes the same $25,000. So what is happening with all of this money and how this money can be used more effectively? It's not like we don't have money for peace building, we just don't spend it adequately. And last point is meaningful participation that should be authentic and actually meaningful. Right? Look at the process of the common agenda. Broad inclusion is not even part of the elements listed under new agenda for peace. There is a women's inclusion language. Well, the world, first of all, has long moved away from seeing the people of the world from the lens of gender binary, but this is really besides the point. The point is that again and again and again, we have been saying through a variety of resources. For example, the Secretary General published the UN System-wide Community Engagement Guidelines. There is a civic space guidance note, Women, Peace and Security Agenda, SDGs. Each one of those have said that civil society have to be part of the process, but now the UN runs an open process of the Agenda for Peace where only selected few get actually a link to register at the formal discussions that are happening on Monday, for example. There is a harsh selective process that is happening, and every step of the way that GPAC, for example, has attempted to engage around common agenda, it has always been about, not at the moment, a little bit later, please come back, and this type of thing. So how that process is inclusive, we have to understand the fact that we do not necessarily know how to facilitate the process that is inclusive and engages everyone. So one thing that New Agenda for Peace can actually do is to be able to devise those mechanisms, and there are good practices that are available for people to learn from. For example, there is a number of UN civil society joint working groups at the global level as well as the country level. So why don't we learn from this and try to understand what is exactly that makes them effective and what type of benefit we can get out of it and how to practically do it actually at the everyday basis. So to conclude, we at GPAC do see the value of the agenda, but only if it would be able to shift the narrative and provide resources and tools to those who have been consistently left in a separate Zoom room to be part of the conversation. Until there is an indication on the part of the leaders of the world and leaders of the process, it basically remains to be, diplomatically speaking, an agenda that we will monitor from the side. It has been a promise of we the people for over 80 years, I believe at the moment, but it still has not been implemented. So I honestly would argue that the common agenda will only be valuable if it actually makes some of the promises a reality. Thank you.
Yep. Great. Thank you so much. We can now open the floor, and I see that Khaled Imam wishes to make an intervention here or to ask a question. Khaled, you have the floor.
Great. Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for all the speakers for this great remarks. Very quick comment reflecting on what Marina just said. I think we're really developing agendas and documents and resolutions, and we're still missing the practical side. We're still missing the implementation side, because maybe creating our common agenda will be cost-wise will be a lot, but it's easy than taking a position towards a serious issues. Augusto at the beginning spoke about the corruption as one of the biggest challenges for implementing anything, for achieving the SDGs, for working in climate, because those people, corrupt people, they care about power, not about people. And then they know how to use all this kind of agendas, including the SDGs and our common agenda, to get legitimacy in their own country, and continue in power. How many countries right now the people can choose who control them? In Middle East, we only have 2 countries that somehow we can say that they have some democracy. Only 2 countries in Middle East, and fortunately they are going back, Lebanon and Tunisia. So yeah, creating our common agendas, again, it's multi-stakeholder process and etc. But we need from the UN to think about the practical side, to take positions with those in power, corrupted people, dictatorships. We need to take a position about what's happening in Myanmar right now, in Syria, in Ukraine, not creating agendas because this is the easy thing to do. Let's create agendas and invite civil society and member state, and then it will be the same. And the point that I want to raise again, that we really need to be careful about how these agendas giving legitimacy to governments who has no legitimacy, member states who are corrupted and their dictatorship, no anyone selected them to be in power, and they are the first one in the place in the General Assembly to discuss or decide what to do. Augustina mentioned that the SDGs has a lot of relation with human rights. That's correct, but it's in theory. In practice, Syria is saying that they have a SDGs plan, and this is crazy. How is Syria working on SDGs? There is 500,000 people killed in the conflict in Syria, and Syria is still saying that we are achieving the SDGs, and etc., etc. So we need to think about this, how those people using these kind of agendas to get foreign aid, and then foreign aid will not go to the people, will go to these governments to get more power and continue the repression. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much. In fact, Augustina, I really thank you. We really thank you for bringing in the economics, the investment in peace building issue, the importance to get to the local level. Do you see on the ground that it's interrupted by a chain of corruption? Do you want to give us a few examples that you know of? You have the floor. Open your mic, Marina.
In terms of how corruption is affecting
the investments in peace building, yes, and preventing that investment getting to the local level.
Well, I have a positive example, actually, not as much as a bad thing about corruption, but I do have a positive example because GPAC has recently been doing a lot of research when we reached out to donors who do invest in peace building. And we have been asking a question, why there is no trust into local peace building work? And this question of, potential corruption came in. And then we started surveying donors and asking that question, how many instances in your practice has been when civil society has actually did not use the resources adequately. And what we have found out that it's about 1% of all of the Western European donors who have ever experienced the issue of corruption when it comes to local peace builders. So there is obviously, I guess it's a positive element in terms of, that chance is the same of a chances to invest into global INGO that is kind of poorly managed in a poor way, right? So it's really not different in that sense, but it is very different from comes to, right, power and control and how that could be managed. So I think a lot of it is connected to this. But one point also that I wanted to mention on corruption from our research in Mozambique is that probably some of you know that in 2016, that was a big scandal in terms of Mozambique, really, the government kind of taking up all of the donor money that are coming to the country and kind of living off that money. So that is actually something that prevented peace building money coming into the country and has really been a big hit on civil society in that process as well, because when donors pull out the money, it also affects civil society to big extent. So I guess one good practice that can be learned now from Sudan, where there is no government, but donors do invest quite a bit in civil society work. So perhaps it's really up to the donors to make that type of reflection and to see whether it's valuable to pull out money and kind of let this conflict prevention element and peace building element of the work not to be there, or invest adequately, differently, and with more impact into perhaps the work of civil society and build their capacity to kind of legitimize all of the agendas at the country level.
Thank you so much. I think Nobi Moyo is with us. Monique, do you see that he is in the room? Nobi, I think, belongs to the same organization and might want to add a few words on GPAC's work in the Africa region. Nobi, you have the floor.
Thank you, colleagues. And wonderful deliberations coming in. That's the beauty of peace building. Different views coming in to enable us to have a broader picture of what's happening and how we can intervene. And I think on the current topic, maybe on the current issue, I think maybe what I would like maybe also to kind of like highlight on is how, from a UN perspective, when you're talking of supporting, or maybe let's say from a, yes, more specifically UN, yes, working with civic society, where the UN within the framework of its, repositioning itself and the other initiatives that the Secretary General has kicked in to try and revamp the UN so it becomes more effective. It includes, the UN system working much more closer with governments. So that is done, as much as good as that has been, it's meant that some of the support that was going directly to civic society organizations and communities is now coming in through governments because of the strengthened partnerships. But then if you look in some of the areas, more specifically, when you look at, let's say, where there's a lot of state repression, where there's a lot of civic society repression, where governments ordinarily wouldn't want to work with civil society, if anything at all, maybe have them non-existent. That has meant the worsening of, the chokehold on civic society, because if most of the funding is coming through government, a lot of it is just being implemented or just channeled to something else, or the impact actually has been reduced. So as much as one of the key issues that I think is going to be key is how then in this new agenda, in this new approach, maybe we design a new approach that sees how the continuous support for communities and civic society is sustained, as much as the UN is working much more closer with governments and, building of trust between the two, civic society and governments, and how then that collaboration can be strengthened into meaningful impact in terms of prevention, in terms of sustaining peace, and culminating to development in itself. So I think those are some of the key things that I would like to add on to say we need to be more practical in how the approach in terms of support and resourcing is going to be implemented as we go forward. Because if it continues to be more from a government side in certain parts, even if you look at it from the Afrocentric side, it can affect the long-term peace and security of those particular spaces.
Absolutely. And good governance is the key. Peace is the key. At this point, I'm going to invite Dina to come back from the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, because Dina, is there a positive example that you can give us about funding, about the kind of activities that are happening locally? Dina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sun Young. I actually wanted to touch more on ICTs and digitalization and their link with women, peace, and security.
Yes, please do that.
So going back to Augustina's presentation. So thank you for the time and the space. Last year, we conducted a research to better understand the types of technologies that women peace builders and human rights defenders use, the challenges that they face in accessing them, but also the threats and, more importantly, the opportunities that these present in terms of promoting peace. So what we found, and similarly to Agustina's presentation, what we found was accessibility and security are often the two primary concerns that guide women's choice of what technology to use and what digital platforms to be on. And oftentimes these are the most simplest of technologies, not advanced technological solutions, and they're often combined with non-digital tools. At the same time, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a paradigm shift and has had a considerable impact on women peace builders' use of technology. It's now become almost essential because not having access to technology de facto means being excluded from opportunities and from different types of participation. So how do women peace builders and human rights defenders use ICTs? In many ways, mostly to amplify their communications reach, strengthen their advocacy, and gain access to participation, but also to collect data, document violations, including human rights violations, to promote women's empowerment, whether it's online learning or psychosocial online counseling, among other forms of online services. But then related to your point on funding, technology is one of the primary tools that women peace builders and civil society organizations use to raise, access, and manage funds, including through crowdfunding platforms. However, they face very large challenges, including just basic internet access and connectivity. But beyond just this infrastructural and financial barrier, there are also very, very strong and deeply engendered patriarchal norms that prevent many women from accessing the internet. And this is even more further limited by the very gendered security risks and violations that women face in online spaces. However, to date, there are no adequate gender responsive and functioning accountability mechanisms for gender-based violence and violations of women's rights online. There's been plenty of advances in terms of the legal frameworks on ICTs and peace and security, but they lack a gender lens. So getting to solutions, we developed a set of recommendations for policymakers, for technology companies, and other stakeholders. And I'll try to summarize them here, but I'll also share a link to the report, which provides more information, more detail. But our recommendations are to first significantly increase investment in universal and affordable access to internet. This is in line with target 9.c of the Sustainable Development Goals, and to take proactive measures to guarantee internet access for women, girls, and young women, particularly women and girls that are further marginalized. This includes refugees, IDPs, and those living in conflict-affected and rural areas. Second, to promote and facilitate the inclusive design and development of ICT products and services, including by supporting diverse women and girls to pursue careers in the technology sector, but also just by conducting consultations with diverse groups of users of ICT products, of which women are a large group of, but also including women and girls living in conflict-affected communities and countries. Third, to strengthen the protection of women's rights in the underregulated online spaces by adopting concrete laws, policies, and protocols that ensure their safety in line with existing legal frameworks that protect women and girls' rights, such as the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda and other related frameworks. And fourth is to invest in programs that strengthen the capacity of women and youth to access and effectively use these online spaces, especially in the context of the global pandemic and how our new normal is really largely online as we are meeting here today. So I'll stop here, but I will share a link to the report in the chat, which of course has much more details, analysis, as well as country-specific examples from the Philippines, Colombia, with very interesting examples of how technology was used to facilitate the implementation of the peace process, of the peace agreements in both countries, and how women peace builders and human rights defenders are using technology to make the peace agreement implementation more inclusive by reaching indigenous groups and other marginalized communities. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for those thoughts. Indeed, I was reminded also of the fantastic work that groups have done with early warning systems to contain a conflict in small areas and contribute to conflict prevention. Marina, I'll give you the floor again just to react, and then we can move on.
Well, I guess just to the points raised both in the chat and what has been raised by colleagues on, like, I guess, verbally, there is a lot of things that are yet to be done on the agenda that already exist. So I think, as Dina just mentioned, right, there are things that are happening, but not necessarily developed in a way that are inclusive. So I'm just keep reiterating the fact that if there is a new agenda, it has to be really the agenda that in practice brings the needs of people together and actually forces implementation to the extent possible with an accountability mechanism, right? It needs to be something that is tracked. I think Women, Peace and Security agenda was a little bit more successful in that sense that, you know, member states did commit to kind of organize this accountability kind of conversation in terms of who has done what. There is a compact. So that needs to be logic that follows the new agenda for peace if it is to be a relevant process. Otherwise, I think we are just better to save our resources and invest it in something else.
Very good. Thanks so much. So as you all spoke, I was reminded of something that a youth presenter had mentioned at the last President General Assembly's consultations, which were indeed on financing and building trust. And he had said that unrest is the voice of the forgotten. So this connection that we've been making here between economic security, economic honesty, good governance, the rule of law and human rights, access to digital platforms, and peace is not very far-fetched. These are all interconnected, and these multiple dimensions are things that we hope in this process we actually work better towards understanding the connections and seeing the interrelationships and their implications for our agenda, which is really to revitalize the UN so that future generations can live in harmony with each other and certainly with nature. So at this point, I have a bit of a challenge for our three presenters. We have three very important meetings coming up. One is the Education Summit planned for this year in September, Education Summit. One is the Summit of the Future proposed for 2023. And the other is the proposed Social Summit in 2025. So the challenge to our three presenters is, can you pick one of these summits and tell us why you think that summit might produce the best or maybe even the worst results to bring us closer to an accelerated action plan for the Sustainable Development Goals and for the issues you raised today. I will call first on Marina. You get to speak first. Come on. Back to you. Which of these three summits do you think might contribute the most to the agenda that you care about? Marina, you have the floor.
Oh, that's a question. I mean, I would be probably, I would refuse to pick if I may, because I do think that there is so many cross-cutting issues, and I think we have to take it as a norm to kind of bring different ideas together and really try to understand how we merge ideas and how we make ourselves more inclusive, both in terms of people, but also in terms of issues that we are bringing on the table, because none of this, it's a basic premise of human rights, right? That they are interconnected and different issues are connected to each other. So I apologize, but I'll, I chose all of them. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, you are allowed for the moment. Just to say that there are some people, of course, who hope that the Social Summit will be the place where we finally integrate the political agendas that we've been talking about with the economic ones in the context of social development. So maybe that will take us further. Augustina, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I want to echo what Marina just said. I don't think I can pick and choose one over the other. So without picking any of them, I think the work that is done between now and the 3 summits will be key. There's a lot of these issues that we're talking about that are deeply affected by context, and that the results and the outcomes that could be achieved within any of these summits will depend a lot on the work that we do prior to those summits, in preparation to those summits. So yeah, I would encourage all of you who are better positioned in a lot of the substance matters that you want to see on this summit to start preparing for all of them, and leave some room. I think one of the things that the pandemic at least taught me is leave some room for the unexpected opportunities and challenges.
Thank you, Augustina. If I could share just an experience that I had with the UN Fourth World Conference on Women, what you just said about the process leading up to the summit is so true. That 1995 Women's Conference convened by the General Assembly was successful mostly because of the 2-year preparation that took place prior to the summit. So those of us who are cynical about summits might remember they are what we make of them. And so each of these summits, the education, the Summit of the Future, which will focus on the Youth Council and what will happen with that, and the Social Summit, which is really a possibility to integrate. The success of those summits will depend on us and our process and what we require in the preparation as much as what happens at the very end. And with that, I'd like to give the final word to August to say a few words.
Thank you very much. I am very sympathetic to the remarks made by Marina and by Agustina in terms of the cross-cutting issues that we have to deal and address in the next several years. I think all 3 summits are very important, and I take your point about the importance of preparation, and what eventually get out of these summits is very much a function of the inputs, the collaboration, in events like today's conversation, multiplied by 1,000 in the coming months and years. It seems to me that the challenge that we face today is that we're facing a whole range of sort of global problems, climate change, nuclear proliferation, and a very unsettled security situation. Look what is happening on the Ukraine today and in coming days. Issues of income inequality, climate change itself brings, a whole range of other collateral problems having to do with biodiversity, with rising sea levels, and so on. My point about these global challenges is that they do not admit a solution outside of a context of much stronger international cooperation. And I think that has to be an underlying theme over these 3 summits. How do we work together to confront these global problems? How do we rise above narrow national interests? How do we make national sovereignty a part of our history rather than the overriding principle of international relations? It seems to me that unless we succeed in doing that, then we risk being overwhelmed in coming years by multiple crises. The framework that we have to tackle climate change is not working. Emissions have been rising. We basically have to come up with reforms to our global governance architecture. What I spoke about today in respect to the International Anti-Corruption Court is a reform to our global governance architecture to address a specific problem. Let me conclude by sharing with you a phrase from the head of the Baha'i community written 91 years ago, which I think echoes in a very powerful way the main message of our common agenda of the Secretary General. In 1931, in the middle of the global depression, Shoghi Effendi said the following. He said, "The fundamental cause of world's unrest today is attributable to the failure to adjust the system of economic and political institutions to the imperative needs of a rapidly evolving age. That statement remains valid and current today. That is our challenge. How do we change the United Nations into an organization that is fit for purpose, that becomes a problem-solving organization that will actually empower us to find solutions to these problems? If we fail there, then we will have failed for ourselves, we will have failed for future generations, and we will be encountering a whole range of very painful, very destructive, very costly crises in coming years. So the challenge is before us, and we need to do something about it. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much to our panelists, our presenters, those of you who contributed your questions and ideas to this conversation. I'd like to invite you to our next dialogue on February 25th, when we will discuss the thematic session on protecting our planet and enhancing international cooperation. That will prepare us for the President of the General Assembly's next consultation, two-day consultation in early March. Please, there will be 2 more in early March. Please look for that. You can join on UN TV and also, of course, send us messages that you think are important to continue this discussion. Also wanted to point out that the UN Commission on the Status of Women meeting in March, the priority theme is climate change, and the review theme is economic empowerment, things that we have brought up here today. Thank you to everyone who has really contributed to this conversation. There will be a report. As I mentioned very early on, your remarks in the chat will be taken very seriously and incorporated. If you have any parting thoughts that you really thought we didn't cover that you needed to say, you have 2 minutes to put them in the chat for the record and for history. Thanks so much to everyone. I'm signing off.